What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another episode with Headbanger Sports. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the three main principles for maintaining a healthy and productive throwing program in the fall. So just to clarify, this episode is being tailored to middle school, high school, and collegiate pitchers. So for you athletes or for you coaches who are wanting to empower your athletes to have a more productive throwing program, one, why you should be optimizing the fall to begin with your throwing program. Two, why integrating a pre and post throwing routine are vastly important to your development. And three, how having a solid conditioning and lifting routine is going to enhance everything that we're trying to do on the throwing side. So first, let's talk about the significance of throwing in the fall. So the temptation for you 8th grade athletes is to compete during this season because you're trying to earn a spring roster spot on the varsity squad. But let me just tell you, if you are going in with this mindset, you are going to be missing a huge development window that could be the difference between you actually making that roster spot and you getting stuck on freshman ball. Also, side note before we get any further, freshman ball is sometimes the right option for you because it means you're going to get more playing time, which means you're going to be developing faster, and then long term you're going to be spending more time actually starting on varsity in the years to come. But for ego's sake, let's just say we're trying to make that varsity roster spot. If you're investing time in the fall to develop your arm strength through long toss programs and a consistent bullpen schedule, you're most likely going to actually be able to perform at the capacity that you need to in order to make a varsity spot. And for you high school and collegiate athletes, you know that the fall is designed specifically for you to be able to put on that weight that you need to in the weight room, be able to increase that max distance in long toss, to be able to develop your mechanics on the mound, and to be able to just improve any mechanical deficiencies that you have in your overall throwing program. So for all of you pitchers out there, here's what I plan for my guys. If you had an extensive spring and summer and you're really needing a break from throwing, obviously that's a very good thing, but you're going to need to have a return to throwing program implemented so that you are gradually getting your arm prepared for the fall or the winter. So a general rule to a return to throwing program, if it wasn't like an injury that made you have to take a break to begin with, is if you took 2 weeks off, you're going to add 2 weeks to your return to throwing program, and then at the back end of that 2 weeks, you're going to add a third week. So 2 weeks off from throwing means that it's going to take you 3 weeks to get your arm back in shape to throw bullpens. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to ramp your arm back up, but the general rule is you want to be gradually increasing your distance from a starting position where maybe you're starting at 60 feet and you're gradually working your way back to your max distance over the course of a couple weeks. And then you start integrating the pull down phase where you're really trying to throw your hardest on a line after you get out to your max distance. And then after you've completed both of those phases, then it's time to throw your bullpens. So once you're at that phase, now it's time to start understanding how many bullpens to throw, how many long toss sessions to throw, and what to do on those days off. And all of that brings me to point number one. I think of this concept in terms of hot, warm, and cold. So let's say you're throwing a bullpen on Monday. That would be a hot day in my book. So what we want to be doing on a hot day is we want to be getting all of your long toss in, maybe all of your pull downs in, and your bullpen itself all on the same day. So if that hot day was on a Monday, Tuesday would be a cold day. So a cold day is like a 90-foot throw, keeping it nice and light, not trying to do too much. After Tuesday going into Wednesday, that would be a warm day. So not necessarily getting out to 90 feet, maybe getting extended to 120, maybe 150 feet, but definitely not throwing anything on a line, and we wouldn't get on the mound that day. The following day would be the hottest day of the week. So that's where you go max long toss, max pull down, and your longest bullpen, or maybe a high intent bullpen day. And if you're facing batters at that point, that would be the day you would want to face them. Then the following day would be a cold day. And then finally that Saturday and Sunday would either be 2 off days, or Saturday would be a warm day and Sunday off. Now to clarify, I never like to implement like specific distances you should be throwing out because every athlete is different. And so what I always tell athletes is to just listen to your arm and see what your arm is asking for that day. Maybe your long toss day is only 180 feet, and that's totally fine. You just got to listen to your arm and push yourself to the capacity of the heat that you're trying to push for that day. This brings me to point number 2, and that is your pre and your post throwing routines. Now, what I have learned from my time in developing athletes is that everyone's pre-throwing routine is immensely different, and every athlete's body types are immensely different. So the general piece of advice that I can give you is that you need to pay attention to details when you're developing these routines, but you also need to kind of buy into whatever the process is that works for you specifically. A couple general rule of thumbs when I'm watching athletes develop their pre-throwing routine is that everyone does some type of band, whether it's J bands or cross symmetry band. Everyone has some type of mobility or flexibility aspect with both their lower half and their upper half. Most athletes do some aspect of soft tissue work, whether that's with a lax ball, a lacrosse ball, a massage gun, or a foam roll. Every athlete has some type of plyo ball routine, whether it's just with the 5-ounce balls or with the entire kit. What I'm starting to learn is a lot of athletes like to do explosive movements with like either medicine balls or box jumps or something along that line because they like to warm up their central nervous system to be explosive by the time they throw their first throw on the field. So for your younger athletes, if you show up to the field and you just do one quick set of 10 of J-bands and maybe a couple plyo throws into the wall, and then you go out and throw a long toss, you are way behind the curve, and so many more people are going to last a lot longer in the game than you. So make sure you listen to your body and start watching the guys that are older than you, see what they're doing to help develop their arm. And second is a post-throwing routine. Now this one's a little bit tricky because this is typically where you want to use that time wisely to kind of build up the weaknesses that you have and turn them into strength. Not every athlete has the same problems. However, if you have the luxury of seeking out the expertise of a physical therapist, I highly recommend that you do that because they will be able to tailor your specific post-throwing routine to whatever inefficiencies that you have, and they'll also be able to identify mobility dysfunctions or flexibility dysfunctions or strength deficiencies that are going to hold you back if you don't address them. And the third point on this video is everyone's least favorite topic, and that's conditioning. Conditioning is so important for developing arm health, but I'm not a huge fan of just turning into a track star. So hear me out. It's my belief that there are two ends of the spectrum. There's the guys that just go all in on conditioning, and they use conditioning in the fall as a way to kind of weed out the weak athletes or the out of shape athletes, and those guys end up getting hurt. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum where athletes aren't investing enough time into conditioning, and so by the time they get to the long tail end of spring, their body isn't in shape and they break down a lot faster. The conditioning program that I recommend goes hand in hand with the throwing program that I outlined earlier in this video. So let's use that hot, cold, warm analogy again. On a hot day when you're throwing your max distance long toss and you're getting your bullpen in, I have my guys do sprints that day. Sprinting fires up the central nervous system and promotes that fast twitch muscle fibers that we're trying to develop, while also developing power attributes that are going to translate better to the game. On cold days, I like having my athletes do flush runs where it's not necessarily long distance track star running, but you're doing longer intervals of time with rest implemented in between those sets. So instead of doing like an entire pull there and back, we're maybe doing like half a pull where it's 80% intensity with a walk in there, but then as soon as you hit that other end, you go back into another 80% intensity. So it's not quite like a high power output sprint day, but you still are getting in more than just a long distance run. Warm days for me are kind of like off days for conditioning, where I have athletes do like either an extensive amount of scap work that day, or I have them do an extensive amount of medicine ball explosive movements, or maybe even some like mild plyometric stuff. And then for some guys who like got crushed during their conditioning on the first 2 days, that'll be more of like a yoga or recovery day for them. So my mindset for conditioning in terms of an entire calendar week is you'll have 2 sprint days, 2 flush days, and 1 to 2 recovery days. So I think it's important to note that as you are developing this program, you don't want to front load everything and make everyone puke. You want to gradually increase intensity so that by the end of fall, it's been a productive season and you didn't have any unnecessary injuries. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care. God bless.